Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Electronic Health Records to Electronic Data Capture, Enhancing the Data Journey in Oncology Clinical Trials. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Catalyst Clinical Research, who developed the content for the presentation today. Catalyst Clinical Research, a clinical research organization, provides highly customizable solutions to the global biopharmaceutical and biotechnology industries through two established branded solutions, Catalyst Oncology and Catalyst Flex. The company provides full-service oncology CRO offerings with Catalyst Oncology and multi-therapeutic customer or Catalyst-managed functional services through Catalyst Flex. With more than 1,000 staff in the United States, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region, Catalyst's flexible service model is built from more than a decade of experience. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Joining us today are Dr. Tony Tolcher, CEO and founder of Next Oncology, a phase 1 group that seeks to transform early clinical trials. Next Oncology's mission is to accelerate the next breakthrough medicines for cancer, and the vision is to be the most successful and respected phase 1 program in oncology research. Andrew Zupnik has focused exclusively on oncology for over 20 years and serves as the Vice President of Catalyst Oncology. He leads the full-service oncology solution, supporting study optimization, delivery oversight, training, and new initiatives across the commercial and operational teams to keep Catalyst at the forefront of industry trends and cutting-edge oncology therapies. Craig McElhenney brings 25 years of experience in drug development with small and large CROs to his role with Catalyst. As Senior Vice President of Catalyst Flex, Craig is responsible for the global execution of functional services across multiple therapeutic areas. In his previous roles, Craig has overseen global operations across multiple functions. And Jackie Kent is a global pharma executive, board director, and advisor with a passion for working toward all patients having access to clinical trials. She has comprehensive knowledge of innovative healthcare technology, clinical trial design and execution, as well as clinical trial supply planning. But before we actually hear from our speakers, we would like to take a moment to speak to the audience and get a little audience interaction here. We have some polling questions for everyone. Appearing on your screen right now is our first question, and you can participate by selecting from any of the options that you see in front of you and then clicking submit. The question we're asking is, what type of organization are you joining from? Your answer options are site, academic, site, community-based, sponsor, small or mid biotech, sponsor, large pharma, or CRO. Again, we're curious about what type of organization you're joining from. It looks like most of you have your answer in, so thank you very much for participating. Let's look at the results that we have here. Joining us today, I guess 53% from CRO, 16% for site, community-based, and then 11% for site, academic. 16% then for sponsor, small or mid biotech, and then 5% for sponsor, large pharma. Next up, we're curious about your experience. The question we want to know right now is, what is your experience with EHR-to-EDC? Your answer options to choose from are regular user, using it standardly on most trials, some exposure, having seen it in action on a trial but not all the time, familiar with the concept but you want to learn more, and then our last option is completely new, I'm here to learn. Again, we're just curious about your experience level with EHR-to-EDC. And we have most of our votes in. Thank you everyone for taking the time for this. Let's look at the results for this one. 42% of you are familiar with the concept, 29% have had some exposure, 17% are completely new, and then 13% at the end as a regular user. So once again, thank you everyone for your participation in that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over for our first speaker for today, Andrew Zupnik. You may begin when you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I appreciate you taking an hour out of your very busy schedules, and it's a pleasure to be here with this esteemed panel. Nice to see some of the feedback on the polls. We've got a good sprinkling across backgrounds and exposure to our topic today. So I thought we would level set and just start with making sure we're talking about the same topics. We love our acronyms in the industry, right? So just to make sure we're on the same page, we're here to talk about electronic data capture, EDC, and the connectivity with electronic health records, EHR. So EHR to EDC is typically the phrase that you'll hear. Some people use EMR, electronic medical records, but electronic health records capture a wider collection of patient data. And as you know, a bit of history, we're all aware in the industry around the use of EDC. That's standard for everything we do. Back in my day when we started, we were still using paper-based CRFs, right? So that was a 3-part, no carbon required NCR paper. You got 3 pieces of information at the site. The CRAs would go and collect the documents and take the yellow and pink portion, bring it to the CRO. Yellow would be double data entered. I mean, this is almost 30 years ago where we had paper-based systems from collecting clinical data. And that, gave way to where we are today with electronic data capture and using EDC systems standardly on every clinical trial. Tony will give you a better feel for how this works at the site perspective in a second. And then, also at our providers, you guys are familiar, you go to a doctor's visit, you go to the hospital, they used to walk around with clipboards and paper charts. Still is the case in some places, but mostly now your nurse will come in with a tablet and collect information, or wheel the PC in as they're talking to you and type as you're talking. That information is collected in the EHR, electronic health records. What we're here to talk about today is the connectivity between these systems and how data flows from the healthcare system into the clinical trial ecosystem. Those are both 2 distinct digital systems. But what is, fascinating to me is that we are still stuck in a very analog process of the connectivity between those systems. It seems very archaic, to be honest, with where we are and as a world with some of the technologies we have. We still have a physical person sitting here transcribing information that Tony will give you a picture on in a second. That creates an opportunity, right? And that's what we're here to talk about today. There's an opportunity for innovation, to use technology to streamline this process to help these systems connect and flow better. There's benefits that we'll talk about around data accuracy, cost, and time, and all with the end result, which Jackie will give you the best picture because that's the space she plays in on the benefits from a patient perspective. We're all here to do good things, to bring new therapies to patients in a safer and faster way. And that's exactly where the opportunity that we're here to talk about today is, in the connectivity between EHR to EDC. So hopefully that's helpful to level set. Really wanted to start, I think, Tony, you've got the best perspective at the site level because this is where we can see most of the benefits, and honestly why you must be banging your head against the wall of why we're still doing things the way we've done for the past 30 years. So over to you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. So if we can put up the first slide. So one of the issues, I've been doing phase 1 clinical research for about 25 years solidly. And so I've also seen the transformation that's happened from paper collection to now having things like the site enter data. And that was a big transformation. What it did is it shifted a large amount of responsibility of data entry away from CROs and the sponsor and put it in the hands of individual sites, which in itself created new issues. We were suddenly having to hire a large number of data entry people. As we adopted electronic medical records and, of course, electronic data capture systems, this created a whole new and interesting situation. So if we can advance to the next slide. So I'd like to, back up, please. 1, we went to 2. Back, there we go. So let me show you how data transfer works in the current reality, because I like to say it's pre-Gutenberg printing press. So prior to 1550, if you look at this wood carving on the left-hand side, information was transcribed from one Bible to another or one book to another. That was a slow and arduous process, oftentimes conducted in monasteries and some other universities, but it was very slow to transmit information around the world. The technology solution there was the Gutenberg printing press, which happened in the 15th century. And suddenly we were able to transmit and copy large amounts of information all over the world. Now, to the right, you'll see what our current situation is for clinical research. We have digital data on the left-hand side, which is our electronic medical record. And on the right-hand side, you have Medidata Rave. And this version is actually for Astellas. And in between, we have Sharon, one of our data entry specialists. So we take digital data and we have to then type it through a keyboard into a digital collector. So we are not very far from the 1440 AD situation when it comes to clinical trial data. Now, this is quite ridiculous when you think about it, because we don't rely on stockbrokers now waving hands on the stock exchange. We don't expect telephone operators to be connecting one line to another, and yet this is the accepted standard in the vast majority of clinical trials. So, next slide, please. So in this circumstance, we've worked with a company out of Vancouver, Canada called Equicare, and they have a product, a software product called Proximity. And what Proximity does is it connects the electronic medical record directly into the EDC product Medidata Rave. Now, how does this work? Well, if you think about it, data goes into an electronic medical record from really two main sources, especially for phase 1. You have the physician or the clinician who's actually seeing the patient and entering the data. That includes physical findings, especially for phase 1, adverse events, and so on and so forth. From the laboratory side, we have all of the lab findings. And all of the data combined is probably about 400 single items of data for every single visit. What Proximity does is it connects to our electronic medical record. We use a widely used one called Varian Area, but it can also connect to Epic and others. And it takes it directly out of the electronic medical record in an anonymized fashion and then links it directly into Medidata Rave. So it's digital data that goes through an interface into Medidata Rave. It's always remarkable to me as to why this hasn't already happened before. We currently use Proximity in about 75 of our clinical studies, and so it's a useful tool in that regard for speeding up data. And there are two elements that I think are key for us to keep in mind. First and foremost, if you're using a data entry specialist and you're using a keyboard, there's always going to be an error. You will never get 100%. You will never get 100% transcription, error-proof, perfectly fine. The second is, it's time. Increasingly, sponsors say we want data entered in 10 business days or 5 business days. But to do that, you need to staff it accordingly. And if you look at it, staff are the most expensive aspect of clinical trials, and it prevents many smaller community-based research organizations from participating, because which practice is going to be able to pay for all those data entry staff to be there ready before their first study? And so if we come up with electronic tools that can move it across, we can make a real difference in terms of engaging the community, but also speeding data. And that last aspect, which is speeding up data, if you think about almost any different study, data transfer is completely and well correlated with time to decision. So we do not make a decision on a dose escalation until we have the data in. We don't make a decision whether the drug works until we have the data in. We don't file our registration until we have the data in. So anything that can speed the transfer of data is going to be important for biopharma and time to decision. So our philosophy is right now is any sponsor that comes to work with Next, we insist that they have to adopt the Proximity software. As I've said so far, the vast majority of people have done just that, but we're quite willing to walk away from a study if they say they're not going to use this. The key thing is it's very easy to set up, and it keeps everything confidential. It's fully compliant. And from our standpoint, this is the way of the future. And so with that, thank you very much, Andrew, and I'll pass this over to Jackie.
Thank you very much. So I want to take the points that were just made and transition those to the impact that it has on our patients. because while we're talking about site efficiency, every one of the points that were just made on why we need to use tools like proximity and why we don't want to do the data entry as we've continued to do it has a really positive impact on our patients and our ability to not just treat them, but to find out their medical outcomes quicker and better and more safely. So if you start at the beginning of what Tony was talking about, right, he started taking us through the process in which we used to enter data, right, into two separate systems. And as we do that into two separate systems, you're almost blinding a physician or a healthcare provider on each side. So if you're at a clinical research site and you're entering the clinical data from that clinical trial, the healthcare provider that's maybe the primary physician is not seeing it quick enough, right? And on the other side, if we have an EMR record or the EMR data, the PI on the other side, our principal investigator or our study coordinators are not seeing that data quick enough. And so you're a patient sitting there with one of your physicians or many of your healthcare providers blinded in some of the treatment or the labs or the imaging that's being run on you, which slows down every decision point for our healthcare providers. That isn't good for anyone. And so as we bring these data together, as we create tools like proximity, we are creating a better positive experience, a positive journey for our patients, a much higher data quality, which leads to a better diagnosis, to a better treatment, and at the end of the result, a better outcome for all of our patients. You know, there's other tools that are being implemented around quality risk-based management. And that, again, needs these data to be together. So we're also overseeing this data with a much higher quality and a much quicker turnaround. Again, finding safety issues, finding adverse events, finding out the efficacy of our data in a much more timely fashion. Again, a better medical outcome for all of our patients. One other point I want to make about the patients is the beginning of the process. And while we connect these data, that really simplifies the life for a patient. So you go to a primary healthcare provider, they've been tracking data on you for some time. You now get a diagnosis that's going to now start leading you down a path of introducing further healthcare providers in your journey. And now our records are more tightly connected with using tools like proximity. Then you go on and maybe you're now going to see an oncologist that may introduce a clinical trial to you, right? This is how we're connecting clinical trial data with your electronic health records. That physician now will have access to all your data in a much simpler and easy fashion by connecting those records. Again, you won't be, as a patient, having to start from scratch and re-give a physician all of your information. You're already stressed. You've already had a diagnosis. You're now entering a clinical trial. As we can reduce that burden and increase the amount of time the physician's actually spending with the patient talking about the clinical trial and not having to rekey data that's been in a system for many years about this patient, it really increases the comfort level, the relationship, and the overall journey of a patient. And at the end of the day, we need an engaged patient who feels educated and informed about their clinical trial, not one that's trying to enter 200 new fields of data that are already in a system. So I'm not even going into what this does for site efficiencies. That is just huge. I'm really focusing on, the patient's ability to be engaged, educated, and really feel like they're building a relationship with the healthcare provider and not spending their time entering data. So I think we're on to Craig now.
Yes, thank you very much, Jackie, and of course, Dr. Tolcher as well, for your very interesting perspectives on this discussion. I'd like to jump in and yes, talk to Craig for a moment. What I'm curious to ask you here is, do you think there are any implementation challenges with the technology? And if so, just how are these overcome?
Well, I can speak.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that's a great question, Ryan. Just want to go back to what Jackie and Tony were saying. First of all, data is absolutely key, and accuracy and speed of access to data to make informed decisions is essential. Ultimately, what we want from data is to get information, right? And information allows us to move on. So why would there be barriers, and why are there challenges still out there, and why are people not using the technology is what we've got to ask ourselves. Some of that could be technology fatigue. People look and say, "Oh, it's another piece of technology to look at." And there are definitely a lot of different technologies to use in this space. They've got their own benefits. Some of them are still developing. Preferences that each site have to get taken into place. So Dr. Tolscher talked about what he's doing with his site network. Others are doing different things with different players. Depending on the technologies that are used, there is upfront investment that's required. And that's in particular with the IT departments at the sites for that first time usage. We work with multiple vendors, and several of them sort of estimate that to be around about 25 to 30 hours. So it's not as intensive as people initially think it is. And once it's set up after that initial investment, you don't need to do that again. It all becomes about project configuration and mapping. That's really the activity that goes forward. The different technologies take different forms. So we get standalone technologies, and then we'll get companies that offer a full technology ecosystem. And it really depends on sites and clients what they're wanting to use, because they may have preferences on other technologies that fit in. But what's key is if it is that standalone technology that's being used, then there needs to be an API, an interface that's created between the EDC system and the HR system. That's something that we've had experience working with some of the technology companies on and using existing relationships to help get them in place. But most of the well-developed technologies already have those APIs in place with the major EDC systems now. So we've taken a big step forward there. We've been working in space for several years, and I think the other thing that we've really learned is that our clients still have those preferences, and they want to work with particular EDC systems, and now they are considering what EHR systems they want to do. So we've got to be flexible, and we're having to be technology agnostic as a CRO to be able to support what those clients want. Obviously, that means it's not quite the same for every technology that's coming along. So to be able to help with that, we've built a toolkit that we're able to work with, no matter the technology that's requested. It provides a process flow to make decisions along the way, and job aids that our staff, which really includes the key areas of data managers, programmers, IT staff, and then our site outreach staff, to be able to help our sites and our clients navigate that. And the main thing really there is being a facilitator as a CRO. We are looking to join the technology companies together and also link the site into that process. Once we've done that, a key part is then going on to do the project configuration that I mentioned. And that is something that the technology provider would do, but our data managers work with the clients to create the case report forms based off the study protocol, and that's provided to the vendor. They then map that into their system, and where we would support is with that user acceptance testing and making sure with dummy data we see that flowing all the way through successfully to the EDC system. And I think that's really critical before you go live. Everyone then can have the trust. There's credibility in what's going to happen, and we'll continue doing verification along the road as well. So I think for us, that's one of the key learnings, is that need to remain flexible as a CRO, which is slightly different from where Tony was describing, where he is trying to push the usage by saying this is what we have to use through his site network. And to be honest, that's one of the challenges. We're not seeing that happening everywhere. And if that were the case, then we would have that stronger engagement. I think from my side, that's probably the key things that we've found technology-wise. I don't know if anyone else in the panel comments on what they've seen from a technology perspective.
Just one comment to make. I think, or at least from my perspective, the landscape has changed, and I think there's a lot more innovation happening maybe the past year and forward. You know, for many years, there weren't standards that could be shared across the EMR and the EDC, right? And now we have, you know, HL7, we have FHIR, we have people that are out starting or actively developing to a set of data standards that allow the connectivity between the two systems to happen much easier. It was really late to the game, in my opinion, on, you know, knowing that these two independent systems had so much data that were shared. If we would have started that many years ago, we'd probably be in a very different place today.
Yeah, I agree.
Now we need adoption. You know, I think the standard in which Tony's taking with his site really does help in ensuring that adoption's happening through a set of clinical trials. There's way too much option right now in the overall ecosystem to ensure implementation. If we go back to the question that Ryan had, we need to do this webinar again in a year and hopefully see 20, 30, 40% increase in the amount of studies, not only the studies that are actively running, but every site that's presented a study. I would hope that we will see that a tool similar to Proximity be part of the suite of tools used on clinical studies.
Yeah, and I would agree, Jackie, but if we look at where we were 3 years ago when we were doing this, it was taking us a lengthy time being invested in supporting all the mapping processes. Now, you know, we've got a process where we can go and we just connect the vendors together if they're not already working together, and most of the key ones are, which really helps. So that heavy load that was there at the start, it isn't there in the same way anymore.
You know, Craig, data standards and open APIs to make this happen fast, I think, are really important, right? Those are some really big success criteria to ensure adoption continues to grow.
And from our standpoint, you know, we've had some success expanding this to Texas Oncology. Our organization, Next Oncology, is separate from Texas Oncology. But Texas Oncology has recently adopted Proximity, and since they're the largest community-based practice in the United States with 550 oncologists for at least Texas Oncology studies, they can actually use the same thing. And so it will happen, you know, more and more groups will take it on. I think right now it's really just getting a large enough group of customers. And I'm a former Canadian, or sometimes I say recovering Canadian. I'm always surprised that we found this great Canadian company, but they have no traction in Canada, which is sometimes more conservative than us in the United States.
Yeah, I think it's a great approach that you've taken, Tony, to essentially say this is the way that we're going to do that. And I would certainly encourage other networks to consider approaches like that. There are a lot of options out there, and it's obviously looking at the ones that are going to best fit with, you know, what your staff are looking for. But it certainly pushes that engagement forward, and that's one of the challenges I think that we've certainly seen as a CRO. We would love, I mean, we see it as incredibly logical to do this, and the gains are massive, but it's really that pushing it through the sites that's required.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone, for your insights in this very, very thoughtful discussion. I want to throw things back to Andrew for a moment. I'm curious from an oncology CRO perspective, just what benefits have you seen for sites and for sponsors for an integrated EHR to EDC system?
Yeah, I think, Ryan, we've touched on them from, I mean, Tony's view from a site perspective is exactly where I am. I'm aligned with what you said, Craig. I love how you've just put a line in the sand, Tony, and just said, if you want to work with us, this is the plan, right? And agreed that makes a lot of sense. As I said at the beginning, it's fascinating to me that we're still doing having someone manually sit there and copy information over when we've been using EDC for almost 30 years. So let's just get on board as an industry, like you said, Jackie, and we just need to get the adoption at the site level. You know, from an oncology specific perspective, right? And from our view, like Craig described as a CRO, we've taken on a technology agnostic approach, but an ability to fold in any technology. It's effectively up to whichever systems the sites that we're interacting with can or are willing to use, right? But the benefits to me are a no-brainer, right? So let me start with the sponsor perspective, right? For those joining from you know, biotech or pharma side of things, there are kind of four buckets that we think about for benefits from a sponsor's perspective, right? We talked on Tony touched on speed, right? So you now have near instant access to your data the second that patient visit is completed. As they're typing into the EMR, EHR, that flows through into EDC. You have access to this information pretty rapidly versus the time, like you described, Tony, how it has historically been of you have to wait for a staff member to be available to transcribe that information. You know, the sponsors or CROs try to push you on the time to data entry for, you know, I'm going to make our contract squeeze you for 10 days or 7 days, and we all know that that's, you know, has limited impact. This is now enabling near real-time data transfer, right? So you have access to your data quickly as a sponsor. There's the quality component that we talked about. Like you said, Tony, there's no transcription errors. Assuming the mapping is set up correctly, like Craig described, everything is working and flowing through automatically. So you're removing that human error, that risk of transcription, which we know is not zero. The third benefit is cost, right? You're in theory reducing the need to source verify this information. It's straight out of EMR. Why would you need to send somebody on site to go check that something flowed through? There's nobody typing it in anymore. So the benefit to a sponsor that we're proposing and looking to see is, yeah, less monitoring visits, less time on site. There's a very tangible value add there. Clinical monitoring is 50–60% of a full service oncology study budget. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars that are unnecessarily spent on sending a CR out to go knock on Tony's team's door and make sure that they type stuff in correctly. It's goofy. And then I think the fourth benefit for a sponsor is that you're helping the sites, right? If you're enabling a technology like this, you're providing a benefit to the centers. At Catalyst, we've been working with EHR-to-EDC solutions for over 4 years, right, Craig? We piloted a technology in 2019 to start because we're on board. We're a technology forward company. We want to find ways that are just going to move the industry forward and say this is our recommendation. We think it's beneficial for everyone. So we've been, you know, as a sponsor, if you are, you know, enabling this technology today, it typically, you know, unless you're working with a site like Tony's, which is just built into the process, it's something a sponsor has to opt into and effectively pay for. But the benefit that you're then providing the sites is that, hey, we're giving you this technology, it's free, and we are, you know, helping you save a significant amount of time and effort on your side, right? And that's the ultimate benefit from the site perspective, is the time and the resources that are saved from all this data entry. That can be very significant. We've seen, I think, Craig, we've seen upwards of 60–70% of data flowing through from a clinical casebook. That's the promise of this technology, is you can save a significant amount of time and effort from data entry. And then, you know, from a site perspective, that translates to fewer visits from the CRAs. I mean, Tony, we know how much sites love CROs. CROs are every site's favorite. So I think the less effort and time, these benefits are substantial. So our view is the industry needs to get on board. Like we've said, the biggest challenge is adoption and willingness to try something new, honestly, at the site level. Even if it's free, we're running into significant hurdles. I think of our oncology portfolio, single-digit percentage of our trials are actively using this type of technology, and that's sponsors opting into using it because there's a perception of extra costs, which actually isn't true. So.
Yeah, in fact, actually, Andrew, if you think about it, you said this, but I always say, hand transcription or keyboard transcription creates uncertainty. The solution to uncertainty is 100% source data verification. If you can have that certainty, you don't need 100%. And the FDA are fine with risk-based data, but the problem is that if you don't adopt a technology, you are confining yourself to always 100% source data verification. And all that entails, because sometimes people make mistakes that are on the CRO side as well as the transcription side. And so, if a lab value is 15,000 white blood cells, what that does sometimes is it generates a query, not because it's not the real value, but somebody's assumed that there's one sort of digit too many, and that can be built into auto queries and all sorts of things. So, if we can get to the point where we trust the data because it's exactly come right off the lab machine, and we don't spend as much time going around and around on some of these uncertainties, that's going to clearly reduce the cost of clinical research for our sponsors.
Right, very interesting. Thank you very much. Tony and maybe Jackie, you might have some insights to answer to this question as well. I'm wondering if you can just look forward, say 5 to 10 years. What do you think the technology ecosystem at a site will look like? Where does EHR to EDC fit? Is this a standard the industry should adopt?
So I'm going to take the patient stab first. So one thing that I think, I look at the partnership of EHR, EMR to EDC, and I look at that comprehensively, whether the data is collected off a sensor, at a lab, at a site, at a healthcare provider. All that data will create a longitudinal view of our patients, which means any healthcare provider you go to as a patient will have this comprehensive view of you. Again, creating efficiencies for the healthcare provider to be thinking about your diagnosis and your next medical outcome and your next steps, versus somebody entering data, rekeying data, starting from the beginning, which frustrates the patient on what is your name, what other physicians, gathering the physician's record. But, many patients have long-term care, long-term health issues, even just your primary care visit on an annual basis and the change in your healthcare as you get older. That view for a physician and a healthcare provider to see end-to-end really creates a different set of patient experiences and patient relationship with their healthcare provider.
Yeah, Jackie, maybe I can share a story. I'm personally a participant in a number of oncology trials. I'm an advocate for our industry, so why not sign up for the stuff that we're selling? And some are just observational, right? There's an NIH study that I'm part of, which is just effectively a long-term collection and connection, as you're describing, of information. One of the first steps was log in and connect all of my various health records. I couldn't figure that out, right? And
you do it for a living.
And this is not my job, right? So the simple concept of having a technology that flows all this information back and forth. Seriously, as a patient, I gave up, right? So it just was impossible to tell the surgical center that I had a ACL repair on 10 years ago, how to talk to my primary healthcare provider, to the specialist, et cetera. So completely agreed. This is where the industry needs to be. We got to get on board.
And one of the things I would point out, and this is, we 85% of all patients get their care in the community. They don't go to academic university-based cancer centers. And historically, in the United States, participation in clinical trials is low. And one of the reasons they're low is the barriers for sites and practices to get involved in research. Because whether you treat one patient or 1,000 patients, you need to have that data entry specialist, that study coordinator, and all those other things that are there. And so if you are going to try to improve participation in a lot of community-based practices, you've got to come up with solutions that's going to make it easy for them to participate, because if you create headaches, they'll say it's not worth their time. And that's going to be key, because I think many sponsors, many CROs say the United States, Western Europe, we're kind of tapped out. We've got more studies than we have patients, but there's this large group of the population who never get that opportunity to participate because the practice that they're associated with just doesn't participate. They look at this as too difficult, too expensive, and hard to make it work well.
Ryan, I would just like to go back to the data just to answer your question as well. You asked where we would want to be in 5 years. So research shows that 70% of data in an EDC system is duplicated for other sources. 5 years' time, I would love that to be 0%.
Yeah, that would be nice.
That's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to, Craig, ask you another question here, and maybe Andrew might like to share some thoughts too on this one. I'm curious, why does Catalyst Oncology promote a technology agnostic approach?
I think as I was discussing earlier on, there are a number of systems that are out there. There are a number of providers. Some of the large EDC providers have their whole ecosystem that will include this as a module within this, and some of the smaller ones as well. But then we have seen technology kind of come into the industry at different speeds in different areas, and we've seen several companies come in with standalone solutions, and that's happened in this space as well as those large providers. For us though, our clients may come to us and they work with an EDC provider already, and all their studies are with that, and they're comfortable with that EDC system. Their staff are all trained up on that, and then we come to a different client and they're using a different EDC system. So we have to be able to flex, and we've got to be able to work with all those different systems that come along. Of course, we've got partnerships and preferred providers we can go with, but we're also able, our staff are skilled at being able to work with different technologies. And that means we've got to really be technology agnostic in a situation like this. And we have to build processes that allow us to navigate in a similar way, no matter what systems are involved in that. And I think that's going to continue to be the case, because that's the very nature of our business. We're a service industry supporting our clients' needs.
I think it's also about access, like we've been discussing, right? We want to provide, we think that this solution is necessary and valuable for the industry. So if it requires us to work with 10 different technology systems, depending on the sites that are involved in our study, we're on board with that, right? So you need an agnostic approach that allows you to have those connections and systems flowing, no matter which specific technology may be chosen by the sponsor or the site. I mean, like I said, we're regular fans and partners with Dr. Tulcher's Next Oncology Center. I mean, for any phase 1 oncology study, we include the costs of that proximity tool as a standard, because we're assuming that that's something that sponsors need to be aware of. And then if it's not, adopted, then that's certainly planned. One of the stories I love to tell is we've been on one of our studies, we were using this first in human study. Sponsor was on board with the benefits, wanted to provide this to the sites. We were looking at a very large academic center that had already implemented a technology, right? It was already in place. Like you said, Craig, all they had to do was flip the switch and push go. There was no extra cost or time to the team. It was provided to them free of charge. And that specific investigator and his study team decided to opt out. And that was their choice, right? It was just new. I think it was a new technology. It was something else that was scary. They preferred, honestly, to sit and do the double data entry that Dr. Tulcher talked about as unnecessary. And to me, that was very strange, but that's still a trend we're seeing today. That's where I'd love us to get past, to get adoption at the site level. This reticence to trying something new, or that it's just another technology solution. This is already implemented at many of these sites. It's free. Why not, right? I think awareness is what we need to get to.
So I think you're also hitting on a question that's come in, right? That starts talking about what the barriers are, and we are afraid, as sites are afraid to let their sponsor down, right? There's financial penalties. There's a chance you won't get the next study. And it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't know in many cases. And people are apprehensive to change because they have processes in place. They know they can meet the timeline the sponsor has asked for by doing that. But we have to learn how to switch the time frame, because it takes a little bit more time up front, because there's a little bit new process to add here to ensure that the study is set up to use a tool like Proximity, the connecting tool. But the burn's very low on the site. But you pay such a gain, or you receive such a gain on the back end, and people aren't comfortable with this shift yet. And what we have to do is we have to be rewarding people across the entire study, not for first patient in, and then reward them differently for last patient in data lock. If we looked across the study, I think people would understand the value that comes from your last patient into data lock so much faster, with such a higher level of quality, clean data ready for submission, versus a little bit that you're going to pay, up front for a new setup. It's so well worth it, but that's not how we reward people right now. We reward them at the front, and they reward them a second time differently at the back, and we've got to go a little bit different in how we look at that.
Yeah, and I think that's, anytime you're doing a data cut, isn't it? It's you have immediate access to what's happened. So there's that real time where there's often a lag. Dr. Tolscher talked about the fact that we want to make decisions quickly, and you can't do that if you don't have the data. So if you're rewarding for data currency and accuracy on an ongoing basis, then you drive that engagement throughout the study, and you've got a real-time process, which is what the industry's been striving for many years to get there. And I think one of the other things is often, there can be a threat with technology coming. There's a people element to it, and often people feel that threat. I look at it in a different way, and I think that releases people up to do things that they should be doing, and they can be more effective in putting their time into. It means we can do more research. It's not that we're going to remove things. It gives more opportunity for investment going forward as well.
All right, very interesting. Thank you very much for this very insightful discussion. I think we'd like to take a moment to address some audience questions. As we move, though, into the Q&A session, I'd like to direct the audience's attention towards the handouts module in the program, where they'll find some additional documentation related to today's presentation to download for some further reading. I'd also like to invite the audience to keep sending their questions or comments right now using the questions window for this Q&A portion of our webinar. I've already received some questions from the audience, though, so we'll get ourselves started there. The very first question that I would like to ask you all would be simply, what is the barrier to adoption? They say that I think the overall benefits are well understood at both the site and the sponsor side. So yeah, they're wondering, what do you think is the barrier to adoption?
Well, I think the biggest issue, for at least from our experience, has been sponsors who are a little bit uncertain about being the first adopter or early adopter. And the second one is, sometimes I think the fact is that everyone wants everything perfect, but you're not going to get perfection at the beginning. So for example, when you use Proximity, you move 75 to 85% of all the data across. And when you think about that, that's not surprising, because you can a lot of the data you're collecting in phase 1 studies is adverse events that are, if you depending on your EMR, are collected in the EMR. And labs. But of course, you're not going to collect some of the things that, like outside documents, imaging, those types of things. And so there's always going to be a need for certain aspects to be included. So we encountered some people said, well, since it doesn't do nearly 100% of the data, we don't really want to support it. The other aspect that I think is kind of interesting was when we first started off, we spoke to a number of people in large pharma, and we spoke to their IT people. And the issue was, there's a certain amount of sense of security. The system that they have now, why mess with it? In fact, one person from a very large pharmaceutical company said, I'd rather go back to paper than to do and adopt something like this, which was really a striking kind of statement that he made on a teleconference, and some of his own members were there. And I think they were a little bit aghast as well. And the reason is, in the end, is I think straightforward. They are wanting to make sure the data is secure. They know that if they have monitors going to visit, even though it's transcribed and keyboard entered and things like that, that somebody's looking out for it. And that's the system that they feel currently comfortable. And anything new coming along, you know, they have those senses of uncertainty. How does any technology take off? It's really just you cross some sort of critical mass. There's got to be enough people who adopt it, and then people can then follow the herd. And sometimes they're at the beginning of the herd, and sometimes they're at the back of the herd. But it will happen. And so where's that inflection point? I'm hoping, as you were describing earlier, it's going to be in 3 to 5 years. We'll have gone already past that inflection point, but we'll see. We'll see.
Very good. Thank you very much for your insight there. Another question I have simply would like to know, assume you have a study with 15 sites. How do you ensure the data is harmonized across the sites?
I can offer, seeing this on the oncology side of things, we recommend this type of solution on every one of our studies. The challenge to date, this is 4 years of working with live phase 1 oncology studies, is site adoption. And as we've been talking about, each site has their own technology infrastructure, right? And some use different EHR platforms. So our agnostic approach is in facilitating a number of tools that will allow the data to flow through into our singular clinical database. Right here, we're typically using the metadata Rave platform. And then there are a few connectors, depending on the sites that you're talking to, that are able to use those. Like, Tony's team has Proximity. There's some other providers that do similar. And that's why we've set up an agnostic approach. So if you've got 15 sites, and say of those 15, 10 already have implemented 3 different EHR to EDC connecting tools, we're able to filter all that information in the same way, so it's all integrated. And then it's really approaching the remaining 5 to say, hey, are you interested in this technology? We can set it up for you. Here's the benefits. That's what's taking time. It's the reticence that we've talked about. There's technology barriers to just getting some of the larger academic centers. There's a lot of obviously, patient privacy and IT steps to jump through. So it just takes, honestly, a couple of years in some instances to get adoption of a new technology. But the goal is to get all 15 of those centers in that example, even if they're using different EMR platforms, different connecting tools, to flow all into our singular clinical database in a streamlined way.
Yeah, and part of that is about having standards as a base for it. Standardization in itself doesn't deliver, but working from the same base level does, and that enables us to bring us together in a more consistent manner. You're not going to be 100% there, but if we've got those APIs that we talked about, where there's automatic interfaces that have been built, how the data is going to flow into the EDC system, then we can look for that consistency as we're doing the checks that we would through the data management teams and our clinical staff. That really is part of where we are at the moment. We would do that, but the problem is it all starts from a different place. So if we're getting much more consistent on where you start from, then that drives consistency through the duration of a study.
You then have the ability to lay over that, the data oversight, with an RBQM strategy, right? Which again, shrinks your time to submission, ensures a higher level of consistency and quality of your data, resolves queries so much faster, again, reduces burden to the site staff. With the CRAs that have to come to site, we shouldn't be having to see SDV on site anymore, right? We have tools and technologies that allow us to really focus our time on our patients and a better medical outcome for them.
All right, very interesting. Thank you so much. Now, our next question is someone asking on behalf of a small site. How do we overcome the hurdles of having too many different technologies to learn and use? They say that we seem to have a different one for each study, which is why paper and manual transcription are their go-to actions.
Well, one of the things I can say is that the learning curve for software like Proximity is actually quite short. For an average data entry specialist, they can learn the system relatively quickly. Sometimes what a site says is, hang on a second, we don't want to pay for the software. And the nice thing is, from a standpoint for Equicare, the site doesn't pay for the software. The software is built into the budget that goes to the CRO and the sponsor. And so this is actually something that is free to the site. So there's no limitation on financial barrier for anyone who would consider a solution like this. And that's the way it should be, because, to be honest, the sites aren't going to invest in any technology. They don't have that capacity these days. So the technology really should be encouraged and paid for by the CROs and the sponsors, because the actual cost, which is about $1,500 a month, is minuscule compared to most study budgets.
I have a lot of empathy for this point with the smaller sites, because, they don't have the staffs to continue to learn a lot of technologies. This one specifically, I think, I mean, I agree. I've seen implementations has such a low burden of entry for a site. This is one that we should allow ourselves to learn. It is not dramatically different from software type to software type, where something like ECOA seems to feel a lot different when we're implementing that at the site. I think the sites need to continue to drive home with technology providers that they need to be using standards. They need to simplify adoption for sites. I think you need to use your voice and continue to talk about this point, because it's important. But this specific piece of software, the efficiency gain and the simplicity of what you have to do is well worth the investment.
Very good. Thank you very much for that answer and for all of your answers today. However, we have reached the end of our time here today for the Q&A. Now, if you're going to attend to your questions, know that the team at Catalyst Clinical Research will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so that they may register for the recording here as well. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.